at times be the most traumatizing experience in a person's life.
I don't even like the mall. I prefer La La Rue leggings and my essential oils. But these kids wouldn't shut up about, let's go to the mall, Karen, take us to the mall. So what am I supposed to do? These aren't my kids. Their well-being is not my problem.
Welcome back once again to the Space Window for what is sure to be the worst podcast in the world, the One Stars.
This has nothing to do with the movie Space Jam. I love Michael Jordan, and I've always been a fan of Bugs Bunny, basketball, and aliens. I set the gun down on the merry-go-round, turned my back for like 30 minutes tops, came back from the slide, and it was gone. Just gone. No clue what happened there, but that's actually what led me to your product. The One Stars is a Good Point podcast.
From what we gather, something emerged from the dwarf star Tiresias and presumably tore apart the golem.
The energy signature of Tiresias changed significantly at 6:43 set time. At that point, all telemetry cut out. We do know that something left a large amount of organic matter in its wake. A trail of an ashy substance can be found leading from Tiresias, past the Gorlan and onward out of the solar system.
All data was corrupted beyond recovery, and this symbol was found repeatedly all over the station.
I know it. I remember. It was there in Eden. I'm sure of it.
The reluctant, immortal Adam Delta 5 must defend the very structure of the universe whilst confronting his past.
You remember? No, you do not. You are close. In time.
Where are you now? Where is your true form?
Sailing through the void. Searching.
For what?
In time. Adam Delta 5. Time.
Chain of Being, a mythic sci-fi podcast. Listen now, where all good podcasts are found.
My name is Marty Hatchet. Friends call me Dennis Lunchtime. You can call me whatever you please. Just don't call me a liar, 'cause I'm trying to save your skin here, youngin'. How do I know all this about this tree, you want to ask? I know more about this and any other tree than any person could ever care to. I know firsthand what a threat trees pose to the world. An oak can drop as many as 10,000 acorns a year. You know what was here before people? Trees. You know what'll be around long after we're gone unless somebody does something about it? That's right, now you're getting it. Tree Slayer.
Available only on Channel 34 Sketch Comedy Radio. Available anywhere you get your podcasts.
The New Colossus is a completely unhinged dark comedy reboot of Anton Chekhov's classic play, The Seagull. Content warning. The New Colossus audio drama is rated R for content. Episodes contain explicit language, lust and sexual situations, gunfire, death, dysfunctional conversations, illness, bad theater, anti-patriotism, drinking, and arm wrestling. You'll laugh. You'll cry. We hope you enjoy The New Colossus.
Hi, this is Bob Ramunda, one of the members of the team bringing you the PodTales programming you just listened to. PodTales is committed to free, accessible programming to explore and celebrate the art of creative audio fiction. That means our live panels are captioned and ASL interpreted, the episodes in our podcast feed have accessible transcripts, and all our programming is free. But in order to make that happen, we need support from fans, creators, and listeners just like you. If you can, the best way to help PodTales grow is through a monthly contribution over on our Patreon page. Any amount that you can offer gets you year-round access to our Discord server, early access to episodes, updates from PodTales HQ, and more. Check out the goals on the page for some cool plans we have coming soon. Head on over to patreon.com/podtales to make your contribution today. Help us keep PodTales free and accessible, and help us celebrate the incredible world of audio fiction. Again, that's patreon.com/podtales. Thanks!
Our guy's probably 67 years old.
Doesn't he have long, long...
Oh, man, he's got this
Have you ever listened to the world? I mean, really listened. Just stopped and stood still and listened intentionally. What do you hear? Birds? Traffic? Your loud upstairs neighbor having a solo dance party? Some people can hear the buzzing of electricity, even over other sounds. That's pretty cool. As for me, I never really thought about it much. I could hear, so I could hear. Nothing special about that. I guess if I had to choose, a sound I've always liked is the sound of a dinner party. People chatting, silverware clinking. You never know when things will change, or how they'll change, or how that will change you. Seen and Not Heard, an audio drama about hearing loss and deaf gain, is available wherever you find your podcasts.
And this thing is going to actually shoot out 3 ciphers at you. 37. That's 88.
I think he's rolling on the real table.
That's 25.
He said he was going to use the book for one thing and one thing only, this chase.
This is what happens. The field of view just narrows intensely, and all of you can see 10 times further than normal. But because you're adjusting to this, you can only see 10 times further than normal. It's like looking through binoculars.
Oh, the headaches.
Yeah.
The second thing is that the tarp catches on fire. And the third thing is you can all hear each other's thoughts as you all unanimously scream.
That's my daughter, Hopperscotch. Is she just permanently thinking that at any point in time?
Is it the first thing Ellie thinks of when hearing fire and seeing 10 times more than normal? The first thought is, that's my daughter, Hopperscotch.
I was gonna say, Hopper, like, his first order of business is that he and Ellie are both still right next to the now flaming tarp, so he's gonna try to handle that. But then he would hear, that's my daughter, Hopperscotch, and he would think that Sarah was there, so he would be, like, looking around, like, is she here? I can see 10 times farther than normal.
So
it's just a lot of things happened at once.
Quest Friends, a podcast about friendship, family, and the statistically unlikely number of surprise daughters. Transcripts and recommended first episodes can be found at questfriendspodcast.com/about.
Paris, 1699, a time of civil unrest, non-hair-related salons, and the most innovative stage magic ever seen in a union house.
You know, I don't know if you can tell, but the excitement is palpable out there. Historically, no one's seen anything like this. In 1699, I mean.
That is, until it wasn't.
God damn it, I don't want to die! I have a reservation tonight!
Which brings us to now. Berlin, 1933. A time of more civil unrest, artistic pretensions, and rising evil, where a self-involved set designer...
You see these? These are Lamarck's own original notes on the Vanishing Box. My most prized possessions in the world.
An American con man.
I'll even lend you the cape.
You have a cape?
I have a sheet.
And a mysterious scientist.
Where was it you said you went again? You can't speak its name.
Ignore their history in pursuit of the mystery behind...
Vanishing Box.
The Vanishing Box.
Vanishing Box. Vanishing Box.
The Vanishing Box.
Vanishing Box. Vanishing Box.
The Vanishing Box.
The Vanishing Act. A rambling absurdity in 12 parts. Coming this summer.
The show's about Lamarck's Vanishing Box. I remade Lamarck's Vanishing Box. Nothing could go wrong. All right? All right, punch it.
Twins, 12 years old.
Kids, the mission isn't a game.
You're right. And it's a mission that you can't meet alone. You need help. Besides, these aren't just any children. They are family.
Oh, same excuse every time you have chores.
Oh, you'd probably like this one, Alexa. The main character's Puerto Rican like us.
Take back time. American soldier Lieutenant Horacio Mendez is fighting a war on a foreign shore when he's pulled through an interdimensional portal into a time storm.
How cool is that?
I don't do interdimensional portals.
Whoa, that storm sure is close.
Bueno, I'm just glad you're not scheduled to fly a plane in this.
Can we turn on the air?
You know the rules. No air conditioning after
Labor Day.
When I was growing up in Puerto Rico, we just cranked
open the window. We're in agreement then.
Yes, I'm summoning Alexa and Benito Ventura into the time storm. Oh, I can't believe you're here! Oh, twins. Benito and Alexa Ventura, tremendous! You can travel in time, and whenever, wherever you arrive on Earth, you'll exist alive as can be. You can help me.
No, we can't.
Horacio said we both have a choice. You can choose to stay, and I can choose to go without you.
Oh, right. You fly around in some other century. I'll hang here, wondering if you're ever gonna return. Benny.
You're finally ready?
The mission isn't about being saviors of a culture.
It's about preserving and raising up what's already there.
You'll need to redefine what it means to save history. Witness. Find. Remember.
PodTales is committed to free, accessible programming to explore and celebrate the art of creative fiction podcasting. That means our live panels are captioned and ASL interpreted. The episodes in our podcast feed have accessible transcripts, and all our programming is free. Free! Free. But in order to make all of that happen, we need support from fans, from creators, from listeners like you. If you can, the best way to help PodTales grow is through a monthly contribution over on our Patreon page. Any amount that you can offer gets you year-round access to our Discord server, early access to episodes, and more. We have some really exciting things planned. Head on over to patreon.com/podtales to make your contribution today. Help us keep PodTales free and accessible, and help us celebrate the incredible world of fiction podcasting. Again, that's patreon.com/podtales. Thanks.
The universe has an eternal heartbeat.
It's not wrong, you know, to need somebody. Maybe you needed me too, maybe you just did not ask.
Each pulse quiet and across remote dimensions.
If I had my sword, I would run you through.
You would find that the most difficult task of your life. And your last.
Though seldom heard, when a beat sounds, there can arise
deep breath. Center your mind.
I can't.
Yes, you can.
A strange love.
Come to me, my little one.
I spent 500 years protecting this forest from humans. From your kind. I kept this island human-free.
Come to me, oh what fun.
My kingdom spreads within. Hiss. I am a secret king.
My silken thread around you weave.
Their jaws and teeth became material so they could tear at their prey.
Round and round, never leave.
Father, I know you don't want me here.
I walked west of the sun for your touch.
Do you believe in grace?
I walked east of the moon for your kiss.
I loved, and for a time, I was real.
Strange Love, an audio fiction anthology series. Fantasy, sci-fi, macabre. Written and produced by William J. Meyer. Listen on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and strangelovepodcast.com.
People will think we're weird.
So everything's okay?
Mami, cálmate. I'll be fine. We both know she's fretting about you, but I've been telling her our baby girl is going to thrive. Aw, Mom. I promise you guys, I have my telepathy completely under control.
Dante's Inferno seems really dark.
It's basically a tabloid with poetry.
Weird twist, but I'm listening.
Well, I have to pay for school somehow.
You know, my offer still stands.
Not this again.
Here's the thing. I kind of do want to tell you, but...
Hey, no pressure. You don't have to tell me.
My parents passed away 2 years ago.
I can't let myself slip like that. Again. It's none of my business.
I remember what freshman year can be like.
You're still in college!
I'm in my senior year. It's different.
God, I wish I had better control.
Tell me about it.
I'm worried about you.
Quit it! I said I'm fine.
I would do everything you do if I could, but I can't.
How do I make this right? So, yeah. My first semester of college is going great. I got this. The Path Down. A sci-fi audio drama about grief, privilege, and superpowers.
Okay, I think this is working. Hi, you're listening to Soundstage, Theater for Your Ears, a new anthology coming to you from Playwrights Horizons. We're a nonprofit off-Broadway theater in Hell's Kitchen, New York City, and we're committed to the advancement of contemporary American playwrights. My name is Adam Greenfield. I'm the theater's associate artistic director, and okay, so I thought I was going to be recording this introduction in a studio somewhere, gearing up for like a splashy summer release of this series, but instead I'm sitting in my clothes closet in my apartment in Brooklyn, working from home in this new socially distant reality, recording this into my laptop with a mic that I didn't even know I had, which I found in my basement. But if you're like me, you really miss being at the theater right now, which is why we at Playwrights Horizons didn't want to wait a second longer to release this series, but are instead rush ordering this over to you with my recorded in a closet introduction. Soundstage is a new program of our theater, and it will continue long after this COVID-19 crisis. but we felt like the moment to launch the series has to be right now. Because until we're able to gather safely in a theater again, we're determined to continue our work to bring artists and audiences together. So we started making these recordings a little more than a year ago. As committed podcast listeners ourselves, we were thinking about the new explosion of audio as a medium, and we started to get curious about what the inventive, adaptable, rule-breaking, genre-busting mind of the contemporary American playwright might bring to scripted audio storytelling. We started by commissioning a handful of writers, specifically trying to build the rangiest anthology we could imagine, written not to be recorded live in front of an audience, but instead to be something that's native to the digital medium, written specifically for audio. Each piece is vastly, dimensionally different from its comrades in the collection. We use theater directors, theater actors, and theater designers, and we're really delighted by the way it's turned out. The first 4 pieces you'll hear are a lush musical mass composed by Heather Christian, an anthemic spy thriller written by Robert O'Hara, a mind-bending participatory new theater piece written by Jordan Harrison, and a collection of cutting room floor interviews with his parents written by Qui Gwen. And we have additional pieces that are in the works by Lucas Nath, Milo Kramer, Kirsten Childs, Jenny Schwartz, Carlos Murillo, Kate Tarker, and Jeremy O'Harris. It's been an awesome ride making this series. I mean, we're a theater company. We make plays that happen in rooms with people. We didn't really know how to make stuff like this. So yeah, there was a big learning curve in making these. It was a process that was full of surprises as we learned how to do it. But it has been truly a blast, and we're excited to share them with you. We hope you enjoy listening to these as much as we enjoyed making them.
I've seen you prodding the rim of a behemoth skull inside a dream you don't remember, excavating calcite layers of secret and lie. But despite your caution, the object of your searching gazes upon your delicate frame and ingests you from cell to organ to the theory of your imagination. And I do nothing to help you. I just hit record and applaud the 1,000 mouths that swallow. The nesting zone is surrounded by a 500-foot-tall hedge jungle, a rim of tropic glacial paradise, gnawed ceaselessly by paleomythic reptiles.
The stars in the sky were evil, a sin, the souls of long-lost devils dancing naked in the dark.
You think the chameleons have a sense of humor?
I think the chameleons have a sense of everything.
Every few days, a battle fight breaks out. Automatic weapon fire popping against the extra-dimensional moons of megafauna.
Peekaboo, I'll eat you.
Staying sane isn't an option here.
No one is ever going to hear your story. The ones you're trying to tell.
Ectothermic angels on all fours, vomiting out the blood of heaven to bless the battlefield.
They're all going to be eaten.
If you're listening to this story in hopes of finding meaning, go ahead and slice your ears off. Come on, tell me, how close can you stare at the tip of a knife? The Great Chameleon War, a surreal audio drama. Visit thegreatchameleonwar.com for more.
Hi, this is Jeff Andreessen, one of the members of the team bringing you the PodTales programming you just listened to. PodTales is committed to free, accessible programming to explore and celebrate the art of creative audio fiction. That means our live panels are captioned and ASL interpreted,
The episodes in our podcast feed have accessible transcripts, and all our programming is free. But in order to make all that happen, we need support from fans, creators, and listeners like you. If you can, the best way to help PodTales grow is through a monthly contribution over on our Patreon page. Any amount that you can offer gets you year-round access to our Discord server, early access to episodes, updates from PodTales HQ, and more. Check out the goals on the page for some really cool plans we have coming up. Head on over to patreon.com/podtales to make your contribution today. Help us keep PodTales free and accessible, and help us celebrate the incredible world of audio fiction. Again, that's patreon.com/podtales. Thanks.
What?
Has this ever happened to you? You're pouring a bowl of your morning cereal, only to find that in the night your apartment's been overrun by pigeons? Then listen to The God Said Incidental, a dramedy about advice columnists, an absurd city full of gods, and pigeons. A lot of pigeons. The God Said Incidental is currently streaming on your podcatcher of choice, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Radio Public, and more. If you'd like more information about The God Said Incidental, you can find our website at godsaid.incidental.com.
I notice that your first destination is Arabella, but that's not on your way.
It's the first destination the writer went to. It's sacred.
Oh, how excited are you? On a scale of 1 to 10.
1 billion.
I thought the waters at Coast Venus were clear. That's something else.
Visitors. Of course.
You're Captain Valeria, right? Of the Ultramarine?
Yup, that's me. And that's her, the Ultramarine.
Sentimentality is a virtue of ours. It is ingrained in our people.
I'm sure such a thoughtful gift will cheer her right up.
One of the most important people we have to meet is in Arabella.
Who was this person?
No one knows, actually.
Signed Venus, Part 1. Listen on May 27.
Do you two know anything?
Tomorrow I'll do something out of stories. My feet will walk on earth that is not of earth.
Unforeseen circumstances are hard to prepare for. If you can prepare for them, they're foreseen.
Unless our plans change catastrophically, it should be fine.
I've been asleep for decades. How much more patience do you want?
They're growing us a village next to the base of a space elevator on a brand new planet.
For you to have this new and better world, I have to stay behind and make it.
Unimaginable animals. You didn't try the cheese.
What will it mean for all the stories you've told me to be alive on a new world?
It's so beautiful.
Trust me.
Here we go. Check out This Planet Needs a Name everywhere podcasts are found.
PodTales is committed to free, accessible programming to explore and celebrate the art of creative audio fiction. That means our live panels are captioned and ASL interpreted. The episodes in our podcast feed have accessible transcripts, and all our programming is free. Free! Free. But in order to make all of that happen, we need support from fans, from creators, from listeners like you. If you can, the best way to help PodTales grow is through a monthly contribution over on our Patreon page. Any amount that you can offer gets you year-round access to our Discord server, early access to episodes, and more. We have some really exciting things planned. Head on over to patreon.com/podtales to make your contribution today. Help us keep PodTales free and accessible, and help us celebrate the incredible world of audio fiction. Again, that's patreon.com/podtales. Thanks.
Imagine this.
Welcome to PodTales 2020. I'm Alexander Danner, the director of PodTales. We are so excited to be presenting programming devoted exclusively to imaginative audio storytelling throughout the month of November. Today we'll be treating you to the panel Getting It Out There. This is our final panel of the festival. Thank you so much for joining us, but please do come back tomorrow for the presentation of the 2020 Sarah Awards. At the top of this program, we would like to offer a land acknowledgement, a statement that pays respect to the indigenous people who live here and who had their land stolen from them by colonizers. It is only the very first, barest step in what we can do to support indigenous people today. The following acknowledgement of what to keep in mind as we participate in this digital space is written by Adrienne Wong of SpiderWeb. Since our activities are shared digitally to the internet, let's also take a moment to consider the legacy of colonization embedded within the technology, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to so much of the art we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to the changing climates that disproportionately affect indigenous people worldwide. I invite you to join us in acknowledging all of this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good of this time and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. For more information on ways to help and causes you can contribute to, please visit our website. Next, I would like to thank our sponsors, Sarah Lawrence College and the Sarahs, Fool and Scholar Productions, Fable and Folly, Sleep With Me, Dagaz Media, and Winter Hill Brewing Company. These are major contributors who help sustain PodTales 2020 and allow our show to continue virtually this year. Learn more on our website's sponsor page. PodTales 2020 is completely free. We believe in making the resources we're creating available and accessible to all. If you like what we're doing here and you have the means, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/podtales. ASL interpretation for this session will be provided by Brandon C. Kazan-Maddox of Body Language Productions. Learn more about Brandon's work at brandonkazan-maddox.com. Please feel free to use the chat feature here on YouTube to say hello and ask a question of our panelists today. I'll be keeping an eye on the conversation and will pose a few of these questions to the group before the end of the hour. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our participants for today's event. Elena Fernández Collins is a podcast critic and forensic sociolinguist. They host the podcast Radio Drama Revival, write about podcasts for their own website, the Bello Collective, the AV Club, Discover Pods, and curate their own newsletter, Audio Dramatic. You can find them spending too much time on Twitter at Showmark, that's SHOMARQ, where they would probably like to talk to you about marketing, equity, and justice, and reading way too many sci-fi and fantasy books. Fred Greenhalgh is best known for bringing location recording techniques from his indie film background to the production of immersive audio movies. His original series, The Cleansed, caught the attention of Audible, leading him to team up with audio legend William Dufris to develop Lock and Key as a faithful 13-and-a-half-hour location-recorded audio movie. featuring Tatiana Maslany, Haley Joel Osment, and Stephen King. Fred's also the founder and original host of Radio Drama Revival. In spring of 2020, he offered the free online course So You Want to Make Audio Fiction, and released over a dozen of his early works as free script samples for non-commercial development. He and his family live in an off-grid home in rural Maine that he and his wife built. They have many goats. And finally, Tonia Ransom is the creator and executive producer of NIGHTLIGHT, a horror podcast featuring creepy tales written by Black writers. Tonia has been scaring people since the 2nd grade, when she wrote her first story based on Michael Myers. She's pretty sure her teacher was concerned, but she thinks it's turned out fine-ish. Tonia tells horror stories regularly on Twitter at Misdefying, that's MISSDEFYING, and in her spare time she loves to hike, but normally chooses to sleep instead. Her first book, Risen, comes out in December. Thank you, and I am turning it over to all of you.
Thank you so much, Alexander, and welcome to the last panel of PodTales, everyone. We're really excited to be closing this out and leading up to the Sarah Awards. So just to get everyone situated, we're going to be talking about marketing your podcast. We're going to have a slideshow that's mostly going to be about visuals. We're going to work through some questions with you. So if you've got a pen and paper, make sure you've got that ready, because we are going to ask you to answer some questions about your podcast so that you can leave this panel with at least something ready to be able to go out and market your fiction podcast. And with that said, I would like to cue the promo for our teaching tool today, the Barney and Eleanor's Space Circus.
In the outer reaches of the galaxy, there are pirates, mercenaries, warring factions, but none quite so feared as the circus.
Yes, Barney and Eleanor's Space Circus, run by the unlikely pair of Barney, a juggling space mime, and Eleanor, twirling elephant wrangler, and their assortment of space performers. But it's hard work keeping your interstellar space circus going, and Barney and Eleanor will find themselves soon in a love tetrahedron spanning multiple dimensions, because nothing is hotter than the circus, especially when it's in space. Coming soon to wherever you get your podcasts. Find us at spacecircuspod.com or on social media as @SpaceCircusPod. Hoop-a-doop-doop-doop-doop.
So you heard our space circus. Okay. So we decided that the most interesting way to kind of talk about this material today was to use a show, and what better than to make up a completely new show that has been debuted on PodTales. Of course, it doesn't actually exist, but hopefully, yeah, is a useful teaching tool. So Barney and Eleanor's Space Circus. What is this about? Well, it is a circus, and it's in space. That's our pitch. After their interstellar traveling space circus looks like it'll be forced to close, the intrepid duo of a juggling space mime Barney and twirling elephant wrangler Eleanor team up to save the circus and explore the galaxy together with love and robots. So this brings us to our first steps. Real quick first steps. We already have a show concept. We have show art. We have some description that could be your iTunes-y, the thing that describes your show in iTunes. And now we want the world to hear it. So bringing us to our 101 crash course, the basics. I'm just going to lead off with the persona. What is... Yeah, sorry, I'm going to actually read this Sarah Ray Warner quote, which is beautiful. Branding is the way you make people feel. It's more nebulous. Marketing is a thing you're going to do. So a nice way to break into this conversation is that marketing are actions, branding is the more wider picture of what you're marketing. So in this case, bringing us to the first point about persona, we have a space circus with two characters. Barney, always stressed out in a hilarious way over nothing. A British man in the future pretending badly to be a British man from the past. He's ironic, cheery, contrasting with Eleanor, upbeat, whimsical, and mad about it. Extremely clever, but hilarious bad at everything. Gets things done, TM, but can't get it done without Barney. So obviously, these are things that within this show content are going to come out. But then as we think about what we might do in the marketing sense of this show, those attributes that are characters may actually come out in the feel of how this show is perceived on the internet. Bringing us to the next part, our mission and audience. So what's the mission of the Space Circus? The Space Circus's mission is to bring along some joy and some weirdness, keeping in mind how everyone's experiences can't just be solved by wishing them love and care. Our audience, sci-fi rom-com lovers who want something unusual but lighthearted and with a firm direction. So this part's really important. We're going to go into a lot more detail on this part, but the having a sense of who is going to listen to your show, or who, and sometimes with me, it's you yourself are often a fan of what you're creating. I think that's, as indie creators, that's a big part of what makes us want to make stuff in the first place. And so I would guess for many of us, we hear a lot of content, and then you say, well, based on everything I hear, I want to make something that adds to what's out there or complements what's out there in an interesting way. So I actually think that part about audience is really important. Often they may be people that are like you, maybe people who are not quite like you. They probably have a passion. In the case of the Space Circus, circus in space, we thought it would be fun to, everyone knows there's lots of science fiction podcasts out there. We know that there are not enough romantic comedy podcasts out there. So why don't we juxtapose two things that don't seem alike to make a new thing? That's where the Space Circus came from. Now we're talking about branding. The Space Circus's slogan, got to have a slogan. When you're here, you're having a good time. It's unintentionally nefarious, which is my favorite phrase of the week. It's extremely silly. It invites people to relax, to smile. We could all relax and smile and be extra silly right now. The world needs your silliness.
Hashtag.
And I was going to say we need a hashtag intentionally nefarious. I'll tweet something about that now.
Yeah. No, actually, yeah. That's a great point. As soon as we coin that idea of an unintentionally nefarious, just imagine the tweets that could follow that theme. And invite people to bring out their inner silliness and share that. There's probably an elephant somewhere. Again, imagine once you've established that an elephant, especially a zero gravity elephant, that could be, we were just talking about the elephant may have a jetpack. What could you do in terms of crazy marketing things with this elephant that exists in your show? But it has to sort of come from somewhere. That somewhere is your brand. By the way, Ellie is a beautiful person and created a Twitter account, Space Circus Pod. Please indulge us and follow that account and join us in the silliness. Elena, over to you.
Yeah. Please vote on the poll that I just posted. Thank you. Also, props to you if you immediately went and searched Space Circus Pod after the trailer played. Good job. So next this is when you're gonna need your pen and paper or your phone, right, to write things down. So we're gonna be doing something called determining your neighborhood. This is one of the first things that you're gonna want to do when you've solidified your branding, when you've solidified the way that you want to present yourself online. You're gonna want to determine who it is that you want to talk to and talk with, and who you want to be associated with, right? What podcasts do you want people to think of when they come to your podcast? Like, what kinds of reporters do you want to talk to, right? So your neighborhood is a really big concept. So we've made this little worksheet. So the first question that we're going to talk about here are the 5 keywords that you would use to describe your ideal audience. So this is a tip that I have adapted from Eric Newsom, who gave a talk called The Only 10 Words That Matter at Third Coast. And that's going to be linked in the resources slide at the end of this PowerPoint. These are going to be words that you're going to use to be able to hone in on who your audience really is, who it is that you are primarily talking to, having that concept constantly in mind throughout everything that you're doing for your podcast, not just marketing, is really, really important, so that you can maintain consistency. So we're going to be answering these questions for Barney and Eleanor's Space Circus. So for Barney and Eleanor's Space Circus, we came up with these 5 keywords. And of course, when we say keywords, we don't just mean like one word, right? A phrase that you can search on Google or something like that. So whimsical was really important, right? The concept of whimsy. Millennials, because there's probably going to be a lot of millennial targeted adjacent humor based in like the absurdist nihilism that we see a lot on the internet. You can tell from the way that Barney is probably panicking somewhere in the background. Weird sound nerds. I think this is we thought this was like a really great place to be able to experiment with weird sounds, to test things that maybe you wouldn't be able to find a place for them if your podcast was set on Earth, for instance. Rom-com lovers, of course, people who want more rom-com in their audio, people who love romance. That's like the A-plot of this podcast. And of course, absurd humor, which ties back into number 1. So having things that tie together in your list of keywords is always really important. It's crucial to be able to do things also like once you have picked your keywords for your podcast audience, to be able to just go to Google and search for them. Eric Newsom does this in his talk. He tells you to go and search for these key terms in Google and find an image of someone who fits that picture that you have in your head of who it is that you're talking to. And I have found that really useful for all of my work. And so I would love it if you all did that. So
and I think it's really important too to note that especially in marketing, if you search how to develop a marketing plan, a lot of times they'll tell you to come up with the demographics of your audience. Okay, so the demographics are helpful when you're actually pitching to sponsors, because they want to know what's the income of these people, how old they are, things like that. But when it comes to figuring out who's going to listen to your podcast, it's more important to think about what their interests and hobbies are, and not necessarily get super focused on age, unless of course you are doing a young adult podcast or a kids podcast. Then yes, you've got to think about that. But I think this keyword approach is different than what a lot of people see. They're usually told, come up with the demographics for your audience. And while that's useful when it comes to marketing it, you really want to hone in on what these people do when they're not listening to your podcast.
Yeah, which ties into that concept of the neighborhood, right? Which I think we all love, that. Yeah, because it's wherever these people are hanging out online is where you want to be talking.
Yeah, absolutely. This is about entertainment, right? This is podcasting. We work in the entertainment sphere. And so it's really important to keep in mind all of these things that people are doing besides listening to podcasts. Fingers crossed. Or if you're bringing someone in to start listening to podcasts, which we'll get to. So after you've got these keywords, the next thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to ask yourself what podcasts live in your neighborhood, right? And then you want to listen to them and you want to take notes. So we're not going to be actively listening to a podcast here together, but I did do some analysis with another podcast that you'll see soon. But just to guide you through what you should do on your own, follow them online and listen to them, check out what it is that they do online. Take notes on what they do well, what it is that they do, what they don't do that you want to, right? How it is that you can distinguish yourself, and what they sound like. And when you're picking podcasts to do this with, you need to make sure that you pick a podcast that is in your neighborhood, but really different from yours. because those are the ones that you want to make sure that you can connect to, like, all the way across somehow, because making those big connections will help people find you later. But you're also going to want to pick a podcast that's really similar to you. This is also just a really great, really important, I think, step to take when you are in pre-production for your podcast, when you are designing your podcast and looking for where it fits. So we're going to walk through some of these questions. So the podcast that I picked when I did this analysis was Steal the Stars. Steal the Stars is a real podcast. It is it's a real by Mac Rogers. It's a thriller sci-fi romance that takes place on an uber secret base between two security guards who protect a crashed UFO, or not UFO. That's, well, yes, a crashed UFO. And then they steal it. Well, they steal something that was in the UFO. It's a lovely podcast. But as you might be thinking, if you've heard this podcast, or if you're even just looking at the description, wow, that sounds really not a lot like a rom-com in a space circus, Ellie. Yeah, that's the point. So first, what does this podcast sound like? So when you're asking this question, you want to think about atmosphere and setting, but you're also going to want to think about the music, the most common emotions in the podcast, the sound design, the vocal quality, and also something that's not on this PowerPoint. You're going to want to think about the way that they approach their audience online. You want to think about the way that they speak online, not just analyzing their syntax, but like, do they have a persona online that is very specifically a character from the podcast? Are they speaking as the creators on their show's podcast? Think about that presentation online as well. So when I went
this
through,
also kind of helps you. Oh, sorry. I think this also kind of helps you come up with like a pitch for your podcast. You know, if you figure out who else is playing in your neighborhood, you can say that, you know, this podcast is Steal the Stars meets, you know, this other podcast that kind of feeds into it. So you have like these properties that people are aware of that sort of play in this space. And so when you go to pitch this to either collaborate with another podcast, or if you're trying to look for sponsors, or if you're trying to get someone to fund your podcast, you can say that it's basically an amalgamation of these other two really successful podcasts. And it makes you sound like this is going to be a really successful podcast, and increases your chances of being able to land those sponsorships, land that audience, etc.
Absolutely. Really good point, Tonia. Thank you.
Gracias.
So I did a little bit of an analysis here of Steal the Stars. None of this is going to have spoilers, so if you haven't listened to Steal the Stars yet, don't worry. So the first thing is, of course, noir. It's brooding, cynical, exhausted, and this is mostly heard in the voice of Dakota, who we spend a lot of time inside of her head hearing her talk. The speed of the podcast, it's a very fast-paced podcast. There are a lot of chase/heist scenes, right? Because it is a podcast about stealing something from a secret base. The romance in the podcast that it's about develops very quickly, so it kind of lends to this feeling of like you're constantly going. And finally, it's very ruthless. This comes through in character personalities. Everybody is very much very focused on getting done what they want to get done. And usually, no matter the consequences to other people, the decisions that they make, and of course, this is a podcast that tries to talk about what happens when you put love above all else, which can get pretty ruthless. So then you're going to want to analyze what topics does this podcast address, right? And so you're going to want to think about the big picture, but you also want to think about individual character arcs. Because you're going to want to think about, oh, well, if I have this character, what characters from other podcasts are people going to compare them to, right? I think that this is a good way to think about those things and continue that line that Tonia mentioned, which is being able to say, oh, well, my podcast is like these two because I have a character who is like this. So, some of the topics that Steal the Stars addresses are: where do we draw the line when it comes to love, and how do we find it, the line? What is the place of softness in a ruthless world? And what is the cost and responsibility of power, right? big questions that I have phrased as like they feel like a lot. But especially in terms of like the place of softness and what is the cost and responsibility of power, those questions are really directly tied to Dakota's story arc, like her particular decisions that she has made. So, sorry, my PowerPoint decided that it wanted to jump to the end, which is very useful. So next is this important question that, of course, gets really difficult when you're thinking about a podcast that is in the same, like, you know, football field as yours, which is why do you want to share? Yeah. Why do you want to share space with this podcast? So if you were to imagine, right, a listicle, because we love a listicle, that had both of you on it, why would you want both of you to be on that list? And be specific. Don't just say like, oh, sci-fi podcasts, right? Be specific. So here are some thoughts about what it is that I could hear in Steal the Stars that I would want to hear in Barney and Eleanor's Space Circus, which is a balance between subtle and explicit messaging, right? Steal the Stars says a lot of, like, talks about some really important, really difficult topics, and the way that they talk about them is really well balanced in being subtle near the ends and being very explicit about them through what the characters are saying. Some borderline absurdist scenarios. You can fight me on this one, I guess, but I would argue that some of the scenarios in Steal the Stars do toe that line, but of course, as we'll discuss in the next slide, slightly differently. Love conquers all, and love that goes some weird places. I won't elaborate on that one because that is a spoiler.
And just think of all the weird places it goes in space.
Right. We have in the trailer we mentioned the love tetrahedron. Is that right, Fred? There you go. Multiple dimensions.
It's so many dimensions and you know, space things. Yeah.
And then finally, when you're analyzing this podcast, you want to ask, what do you provide that's different? So you want to think about the gap that you want to fill and compare it against that podcast, right? So in Steal the Stars, they have heists. In Barney and Eleanor's Space Circus, I would love to see some lighthearted heists. We talked about also this idea of like love conquers all and the borderline absurdist scenarios. But I would like that in Barney and Eleanor's Space Circus to be a little bit more optimistically comedic, right, in tone. Steal the Stars is a monogamous relationship. We have already discussed the potential polyamory that there is in Barney and Eleanor's Space Circus, so that's definitely up there. I have a note here. It's in space. Listen. Put stuff in space. That's like the tagline to all of fiction podcasting is just put it in space. And you know what? I'm fine with that. And then, of course, multiple perspectives. Right? We have Barney and Eleanor. Steal the Stars is mostly, if not entirely, from Dakota's perspective or Dak's perspective. So it's nice to have both Barney and Eleanor and maybe also multiple perspectives like the elephant. Who knows? So once you've done that research for your podcast, you need to do more research. Welcome to marketing. It's going to involve a lot of research because building your neighborhood also involves thinking about bloggers, reporters, critics, video essayists, etc., etc., etc. Think outside the box, right? So it's important to remember when you go into this that this isn't just audio, it's fiction. So you need to find people who love a good story. Once you do this work, it's going to end up looking a lot like a web of people who are in your primary community, right, in fiction podcasting, who work very specifically with sci-fi podcasts, in several communities who might work in podcast criticism, but also work in TV or literary criticism, and then also outside the community. So you can definitely and should definitely be sending your podcast like pitch to people who work mostly in literary like analysis or critique or TV, especially now. So I made this little list, right, when I was thinking about who I would send the Space Circus to. Just as a reminder, when you're looking for bloggers or writers or reporters, do your research well, find websites and read them, because you want to make sure that these people are actually open to receiving press kits and stuff from you. Use this question to build your press list later. Future you will thank past you if you build a press list, which is a list of people in a spreadsheet with their contact information, links to their requirements, whether or not they need, what kinds of things they need from you when you send things to them, so that you can then do things like a mail merge when you send out your press kits and press releases. So I have a list of some people here. You'll note that I'm not on this list because it's my podcast. So if you want to think about podcast critics and outlets that focus on podcasting, so there's Gavin Gaddis, right, and the Bellow Collective. Multimedia critics, Will Williams, Christina Orlando, who they write for Tor, among many other places. If you want to think about independent critics, there's a podcast called The Podcast Review Show, where they review podcasts, and they have reviewed fiction in the past. There's also Alasdair Stewart, who does a lot of reviews over at his newsletter, The Full Lid. And he does work across all forms of media. And then imaginary sci-fi literature blogger here, right? This is a fake fiction podcast, so I wasn't about to spend a billion amount of time on Google looking for someone.
Yeah, and I imagine we have more goodies on press stuff in a moment, but like, what is immediately evident, right? You don't have people who only cover contemporary hard fiction on this list, right? And I feel like, this is a little bit 101, but if you listen to what many critics and writers and journalists, etc., will say, is like, the number of pitches I get that they don't even seem to know that I cover this topic. Like, that's just stop. Don't waste their time and your credibility. Like, you should believe, and you should make a show that people who cover this space want to cover, because it's their thing. It's just a matter. That's why. Yeah. I just love how you're framing the conversation, because like making the press list is like not the last thing you do, but that's why you need this whole framework. Because if you just make it like, my press list is not your press list, because they're not the same show.
Exactly. Yeah. You need to be really careful about your press lists and who you put on them. And if you make a second podcast, you need to make a different press list for that podcast. And you can use your first one as like your base, right? You can say, okay, well, I made this one, so I'll copy this over into a new spreadsheet. And then you have to go through what's on there, who's on there, and edit them out as necessary. Or add more people in, right? People that you cut from your first list. So this brings us right to the fact that you have to make what's called an outreach toolkit. So I call the outreach toolkit, whoops, sorry, I kicked my cat's house. Right. You have to make an outreach toolkit. So this is just the things that you need to make in order to successfully reach out to people and tell them that you exist. And when I say people, I mean people who write about podcasting in some way, or who you think could write about podcasting in some way. So that's going to be the press list, which we just talked about, a press release, and a press kit. So just so you know, we're not going to go too into detail on these remaining two, because there are some articles that I have written that go really, really in depth. Links to those will be provided on the resources slide at the end. I am going to talk briefly about a press release. The press kit article, by the way, was co-written with Will Williams, which everyone seems to somehow forget. So when you make a press release, you're going to be making a press release in order to reach out to people during major events of your podcast's lifespan, let's say, right? So yes, press release for when you launch. Absolutely. Press release for when you launch a fundraiser. Sure. Yeah. Press release for when you get a really cool person to voice something on your show. only if it's happening at the same time as something else. Unless it's like an extremely like cool person that everyone would want to talk about. And the reason why I have that as kind of like an is because a lot of the times those press releases kind of just, they all look the same. And places that publish, right, outlets and media outlets that publish aren't going to have a good timeline for when to release that work. And it'll be harder to get something written. So you need to just think about when you're sending things. Press release when you are ending a season and you have a season finale coming up, especially if you didn't send a press release for your launch. Yes, absolutely. Send a press release and be like, I have a full season out. Check it out. It's great. Things like that. So when you make a press release, I have made this checklist. This checklist is available as a PDF that you can download in the press release guide, the guide that I wrote. So you don't have to worry about copying this all down. But when you're writing a press release, I'm going to take us through to the last point first. There are 3 core rules for writing a press release, which is, did you focus on your own podcast's needs and not anyone else's? Did you answer the 5 W's, which are the who, when, where, etc. And did you keep it short and snazzy, right? Press releases should not be longer than 1 A4 page. Unless you are a podcast with a lot of money and you tend to break all of the rules anyway, it's fine. So now I'm going to hand us over to Tonia to talk about social media marketing.
Awesome. Thank you, Elena. Okay, so social media marketing. This is extremely important. Honestly, like this is probably one of the best ways to interact directly with your audience, which is going to really help you grow your podcast. Word of mouth, in my opinion, is one of the best ways to grow your podcast. And yes, the press releases, press kit go with that word of mouth. But when people hear from a friend that, hey, I'm listening to this really great podcast, I think you would really like it, they're more likely to give it a chance. Whereas like if they heard about it from a blogger. So it's important to get this right. And I think one of the things that people tend to be afraid of when it comes to social media marketing is they're like, well, I don't have time to post every day, or I don't have time to post like 3 things every day. And that's okay. Do whatever you can. Like I don't post for my podcast every single day. Kind of a rule of thumb is like on Twitter, you should do at least 3 posts a day. Facebook should be 1 post a day. Instagram should be 1 to 2 posts a day. But if you can't achieve that ideal, that's okay. Just do whatever you can. And when you do post something, make sure that it's something good. Put effort into the thing that you're posting. So I want to start with episode announcements. So I have a couple of examples here. Archive 81. It just says here, for those of you who may not be able to see this right now, it says preaching, banjo music, some sort of boneyard, gas stations, blood. It's all in the 2nd episode of Archive 81, Left of the Dial. And then it says listen wherever you get your podcasts, and it has a bunch of different links where people can listen. And so this is a Facebook post, so obviously there's more space than there would be in a tweet. So when you're announcing an episode, you want to do something that's going to entice the listener to go and actually listen to that immediately, or fairly soon after they see that post. So don't just say, oh, there's a new episode up, go listen to it. Tell the listener what it's about. Even better, this episode, or this example on the right, is Pseudopod, where they have a quote from the story on the episode. But then what they did was someone quote tweeted their episode announcement with that quote from the story and talked about, they said, I love this story so much. So not only are you announcing this episode with a quote from the actual production, but you're also giving this sort of endorsement from an audience member who said that they love this story. So it's kind of a twofer there. You announce the episode, but then when people tell you how much they love it, retweet that too. So not only do they get the link to listen, a quote from the actual episode, but they also get an endorsement from someone who's listened to the episode that really liked it. What you don't want to do is just say, new episode, go listen. So again, make sure that you have some sort of content, a summary of the episode, a quote from the episode is great. You can also do something called previews. So before the episode actually comes out, you can start sort of building anticipation for your audience for that particular episode. So on the left, we have a tweet from Old Gods of Appalachia. Even though they say Appalachia, I can't say it the way that they say it. I'm sorry. They have a quote from the upcoming episode. So the same thing that Pseudopod did on the previous tweet that I showed you, they did the same thing, but the episode actually hasn't been released yet. So your previews look a whole lot like your episode announcements. On the right, I have a screenshot from an audiogram that I did for Nightlight Pod. So basically you can go like to something like Headliner is a good app for this. But you can search just on Google for, apps to create audiograms. And you can create, basically they're just kind of like little movies that have a snippet from your podcast. So, pick a really poignant moment in that episode, something that you think is really going to entice people to listen to it, and just create like a little sound clip for it. And then the video for it is basically like closed captioning for that sound clip. So people who don't want to listen, maybe they're like on the subway or something like that, they can read what's in that audiogram and they have a visual to go with it, but they can also kind of get a sense of what that episode is going to sound like. So again, you can do that for previews or episode announcements. Those look pretty much the same. Do you post it before or after the episode announcement? And by the way, you should continue to promote your episodes long after they've already been out. So especially if you have seasons like most audio fiction podcasts do, you're going to have a period of time where you're not putting out new episodes. You should still be promoting, especially like your most popular episodes. So go look at your stats, see what people are listening to, and pull out quotes from there and use different quotes and keep promoting those same episodes. Okay, so let's talk about money, money, money. So we all want to make money with our podcast, right? Like this, yes, this is a labor of love. We love creating podcasts, but it costs money to create podcasts. So at minimum, you want to raise enough money to cover your expenses, hopefully. But, ideally, you would like to raise enough money to pay yourself for your labor. So again, I took an episode or a screenshot from Archive 81's Facebook page where they are sort of hawking their merchandise, which I think is a really great way to get some money for your podcast. So it's not just about saying, oh, hey, we have merchandise. This is great. They say, what would look absolutely cute, or what you would look absolutely cute and attractive in? Archive 81 merchandise. So, something in there that's kind of advertising it, but it's not just like, hey, we got some t-shirts. You should totally buy one, like, unless that's the tone for your podcast. If that's the tone for your podcast, then yeah, absolutely do it. So this kind of goes back to the branding that Fred was talking about earlier. You have a voice for your podcast. There is a voice that listeners kind of have in their head. And really, like if you have a narrator or a host for your podcast, that's the voice that people kind of associate with your podcast. So think about how your narrator or host would try to sell t-shirts, for instance, and then write it that way so that it's very consistent with your brand. And then always, always, always provide a link. Don't make people go search for the thing to buy it, because they are absolutely not going to go Google it unless you just have an amazingly cool t-shirt. Put a link in there, make it easy. It's called reducing friction. That's what you want to do. You want to make it so that they can click that one time, add it to their cart, check out, and they're done. So reduce the number of clicks that they have to make, but always provide that information right there. And on the right, there's an episode from Old Gods of Appalachia that talks about their Patreon. So they're talking about the benefits of their Patreon, just a general chat that they have on their Discord server for their patrons. So, you post something like this on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Even if people aren't patrons, they might become a patron because they see that, oh, if I join now, before this talk happens, I'll be able to get in there and I'll be able to join this talk. Next, we're going to talk about engagement. So, not only is it important to announce your episodes and try to get people to give you money, it's also important to just have like fun conversations with your audience. So, asking them questions is a really cool way to do that. Lore podcast on Halloween, they said, "Happy Halloween. What's your favorite scary historical tale or bit of folklore from our catalog of 156 amazing episodes?" So the reason that I chose this example was, one, it asks a question, but it asks it in a way that kind of makes their audience think about what they've listened to. So when they engage, their friends are going to see this engagement. They're going to see, oh, the Lore podcast talked about vampirism at one point, and I really want to listen to that episode now. So that's a great way to get people talking about your podcast, but then also engaging them and just talking about things that are related to your podcast. And the episode or the example below that is from No Sleep Podcast. And so it's like a picture of a fire, and they're basically asking, like, what do you see in this fire here? So it doesn't really have anything to do with their podcast, but of course, like, No Sleep is a horror podcast. So, you're looking for like creepy images in this fire. Like, do you see like a face in here? Do you see a ghost? Do you see this or that? And just asking people what they see. And so you get some engagement, you get an idea of what type of people listen to your podcast. So that kind of feeds back into that persona that you created earlier, which, by the way, you should always be working on that persona and refining it as you go along. So this engagement helps you add more keywords, maybe change some keywords, remove some keywords that maybe you weren't correct about. Always be thinking about how you can refine who your audience is, that persona. And this is a great way to get some more information about your audience and the kind of things that they're thinking about. You can do things like ask, like, what kind of episode would you like to see if you have something like the lore podcast that's more nonfiction oriented, or if you have a fiction podcast, you could ask things like, what do you think this character is going to do next? Or why do you think this character did this thing? And that kind of gives you an idea of, actually, like, if you're, writing the next season and you're like stuck and you're trying to figure out, what should this character do next? Your audience will tell you what they want that character to do. And you'll get like tons of different answers, and you can pick one, but then you can kind of roll with it. And so you're actually interacting with your audience and working with them to create the content for future seasons. So they're going to feel more engaged with you and like you're listening, and they're going to want to continue to listen because they feel like you care about what they think. Last but not least, related content on social media. So it doesn't always have to be about your podcast. It should be related somewhat to the subject matter of your podcast. So, our Space Circus podcast, it would be really cool if you found memes about space or Space Circus. Again, this is an example from the No Sleep podcast. And it's just a meme about Jason. So that's like a perfect thing to publish on Friday the 13th, is just some funny meme, something to entertain your audience and just keep you in their mind. So even though like this has nothing to do with your podcast, they see that you posted it and they're gonna think, oh, that's super cool. And they're gonna want to follow you for more content like that. And with that, I will turn it back over to Elena to talk about creating a posting plan.
Awesome. Thank you, Tonia. So we're just going to do this really, really quick because I want to go to Q&A. We're going to talk about a posting plan extremely briefly. Just as a note, this slideshow will be available on the event page after this panel so that you can access it whenever you want. So this is the screen capture that you're looking at right now is from Airtable, our overlord. And it is my posting plan with some old tweets and posts that I've done. This is how I keep myself from going completely bonkers. I schedule tweets on this. I draft my tweets here. I put attachments, which if I have an image, I attach it here. I even have columns in Airtable that will count the number of characters in the drafted tweet and tell me if it matches how many it needs to be, and it will check my draft for if I have used tags. And if I haven't used tags, it goes, Ellie, this isn't good marketing. You need a tag. So you can see the two different symbols that I have. It's got a little okay hand for when everything is golden, and exclamation points for when I have messed something up. I highly encourage you to create a posting plan so that you can stay calm, so that you can prevent burnout. Social media is kind of a hell pit sometimes, so please take care of yourselves. And with that, Alexander,
Can
I some questions?
Can I give you?
Oh, yeah.
I jumped over websites earlier, so I could do like the 2-second website thing. So we intended to talk to you about how important it is to have a website at the very top. That was like your 101 before this talk even started. Obviously, based on everything we've been talking about the last few minutes, everything that is in your brand goes on that website. Specifically, you want to credit the people who did amazing work in your thing. You're going to have your episodes available on that, transcripts of your shows, contact form. It's going to be a place your press can live, as well as summaries. And then, podcast SEO is like a whole other topic. But one of the reasons I have a website is it's not a huge portion of the audience, but some people do actually type into search engines words, and a podcast on Apple or Google or et cetera is not actually indexed by those search engines. So you do need a website for that part of it. So I'm done.
Credit your cast and crew. Okay, questions.
Okay, I am actually just going to echo for a moment, as someone who recently spent months combing through podcasts' websites for the purpose of inviting people to take part in this programming. Oh my God, yes, have credits and contact information on your websites. There were some where I just couldn't even figure out how to talk to anyone. Okay, questions. You all have done a thorough job of pre-answering questions that have been asked. But we're going to look at some of what we have left. And so first we have, what are some marketing approaches that can turn off critics, reporters, or other media?
Oh, great question. So obviously this varies a lot, but I will say number one marketing approach that is not really even marketing, it's what I call the drive-by iTunes link. And it's when you hop into a tweet or a post that's by some kind of critic or blogger, and all you do is you drop your iTunes link, and maybe you say like, hey, listen to this, listen to my podcast. And it's on a tweet that has nothing to do with anything about podcasts or asking for podcasts. If they're not asking for podcasts, don't do that.
Stay in your lane.
Yeah, stay in your lane. That's a good one.
Well, and yeah, we had talked about in our prep call, this was the 80-20 rule. This is more social media, but I think it still pertains to anything. 80-20 meaning give before you get. Roughly 80% of your content should be amplifying other people, engaging with other people, and 20% is like the hard sell stuff. Even though that's more like a social media thing, I would guess it still pertains to outreach, because if you're like, I mean, it's like we're not actually meeting in person, but like if you're like at that networking event and it's like the dude, because it's always a dude, it was like, here's my card, bye, I got 10 more people I got to shove this card into in the next 5 minutes. You're like, no.
Treat people like people. That's what it boils down to. Treat people
Yeah.
like people, not like something that you could just use for your own purposes.
I just had a horrible flashback to like.
No, it's happened. It's happened. And you
Oh,
see,
yeah.
and it's like you don't want to be the person. And there's the digital equivalent of this, but like it's literally happened where someone walks up to you, shoves their card in your hand, and as they're trying to pitch you their show, are like scanning the room and seeing whose card they want to shove into the other person's hand. And I don't care what that show is, but now I don't want to listen to that show.
Right.
And when you do outreach, you can kind of do the same thing, because like there's a way to present yourself where you're authentically interested. Like there's a synchronization where people who do blog and cover media like to discover stuff and share it. Like that is literally their job. So just don't be a jerk.
Advice for everything. Don't be a jerk.
Right.
Do you have some advice for keeping people's minds on your podcast while you're between seasons?
Yeah, so I kind of talked about that a little bit earlier. You know, social media is a great way to do that. You know, keep plugging your existing podcast episodes. That's one way to do it. And again, like be enticing with those posts. Don't just say, hey, I made, an episode and here's the title of it and here's a link. Put something in there that makes them want to go listen to it. Posting related content on social media, like memes and things like that. If you've got like a holiday or something, like, a horror podcast, if you aren't producing episodes on a Friday the 13th, doing something like Creepy Cool, like doing giveaways is a great way to do that as well. So you just keep engaging with your audience, keep talking to them. One thing I do on the Nightlight podcast Twitter account is I'll post pictures or just like a short sentence and ask my followers to create a story or like a little, snippet of a story based on that photo or that sentence. And so they're generating content for me, and then I'll like retweet the scariest premises of stories that people posted.
I love reading those stories. They're really creepy.
Yeah, my listeners are amazing.
Okay, next we have what if your social media account is for your production company, and so you have multiple shows that are being promoted through a single account. Would you advise something for distinguishing the content to reflect the separate shows?
I think you should have a separate account for your separate shows. You can have one for the collective that promotes all of the shows, but you should definitely, because again, this goes back to branding. It's really difficult if you have multiple podcasts under one account, say on Twitter, to distinguish between those podcasts, because theoretically they're all going to have different personalities and different voices. And even though people won't say it's disconcerting for them, it is going to be disconcerting for them. And so you're not really going to have a brand voice at that point, because it's going to be all of these different voices talking. So you're going to want to create social media profiles for each of those. Now, I know some people are just going to say like, oh, I don't have enough time for that. I really only have time for this one thing. If you are dead set on not creating multiple accounts for each one, which you should find a way, find an intern against it, then you just have to keep in mind what your personas were that you created, like Fred was talking about earlier, and making sure that when you post as that particular one, you go with that persona. And then I would probably have a visual to go with it as well, because people are very visual. So if you have different visuals for each of those, attaching that to the post so that people can just glance at it and say, this is about this podcast, that would be one great way to distinguish between each one.
Yeah. Another way, I fully agree with what Tonia is saying here. I think that having everything under one production house and not having separate accounts for them can get really messy for the audience. The impact that it has gets really complicated and disconcerting. But one other way to go about it is to make sure that when you are publishing social media stuff under the production company, that you stay very clear as to what parts of yourself that you are producing content out of. So the production house, the persona for the production house is no longer going to be related to each podcast. It's going to be you, the creator, right? And that's like a really fine kind of blurry distinction. So you need to just keep in mind, keep really, really clear in your head what it is that you want to project for your production house.
That's a fabulous point.
And I think we can do one last question. And this is, what do you do if your social account is a lot less popular than your show, which I think gets to the notion that you have to market your channel for marketing your show.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I feel like I'm answering like a lot of these questions, but they're all kind of like social media related.
All good questions, good answers. It's fine.
Oh, thank you. So what I did what I do for Nightlight is at the end of every episode, I ask people to follow my Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram accounts. During like the Halloween season and Friday the 13th, I'll do giveaways. And so I'll mention that in my podcast episodes that I'm giving away this thing. Make sure you're following us so that you know how to enter, basically. But I mean, really, it just boils down to making sure that you're plugging it in each and every episode and give people a reason to go follow you there. So mention something that you're doing, like mention that giveaway. I could mention that, I'm doing a contest, say, on people writing stories on Twitter. So even if they're not super interested in entering the contest, they're still super interested in hearing more horror stories, because obviously they like horror if they're listening to my podcast, and telling them, hey, if you go to my Twitter account, you get to read all of these really short, creepy stories. So, even if they don't care about the giveaway, they're still going to be interested in that additional content.
This ties back to the concept of a call to action. So a call to action is when you are telling your audience, right, the people who are consuming your media, I need you to do this thing. You should not have a lot of calls to action in your podcast. You should not, because it'll get confusing and it'll get overwhelming and people won't do them. So you should have one. And like Tonia said, go to my Twitter, go to my social account of choice, and I have a giveaway. So enter the giveaway. But you have to do that over there.
And put in your show notes too. You know,
Yeah,
a lot of
please,
people
use
look at show notes, so
please use your episode descriptions, please.
I'm terrible about putting it in my show notes. I'm going to be totally honest. I always forget to do it because I still haven't put together a template for my show notes. It's bad, but yeah, make sure it's in your show notes.
Okay, and we are at the end. I think I'm just going to ask each of you to briefly share where our viewers can find more of your work. Let's start with Tonia.
You can find Nightlight at Nightlight Pod on Twitter or Instagram. We're Nightlight Podcast on Facebook. And you can follow me directly on social media at Mystifying, as you mentioned earlier, MISSDEFYING.
And Fred?
Yeah, I do have multiple Twitter accounts for all my shows. The Dark Tome, seasons 1 and 2 are fully available. Season 3 is coming out in January. It's going to be on Stitcher Premium. It's going to be awesome. I know not everybody likes to sign up for paid services, but please do so they hire me to make more. I have the Cleansed. And then if I don't put nearly as many goat photos on Twitter as I do on Instagram, but you can follow me, Final Rune. And if I also at finalrune.com have my free fiction course, all like 8 hours of video tutorials, because I want you to make cool stuff. The world needs your voice.
And Elena.
Yep, you can follow me on Twitter, as mentioned, at Showmark. That's SHOMARQ. That's mostly where you can find me shouting into the void. I'm the host of Radio Drama Revival, so you should go check that out, radiodramarevival.com, and you can learn more about fiction podcasts. We also had an interview recently with the WGA about the Audio Alliance and working to unionize audio writers. So please, please, please check that out because we all deserve to get paid.
Amen.
Thank you all, and thank you to our audience for coming. This session is part of PodTales 2020, 3 weekends of programming brought to you in partnership with the SARAs, the Sarah Lawrence College International Audio Fiction Award. Those will be tomorrow. That is the final event of our festival, and I hope you'll be there. Be sure to subscribe to PodTales on the podcatcher of your choice to find the podcast showcase selections that we will continue to be featuring from now through the end of the month. As a reminder, PodTales 2020 is completely free. We believe in making the resources we're creating available and accessible to all. If you like what we're doing here, please consider supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/podtales. Finally, we would love to know what you think. You can find a panel feedback form linked both in the YouTube description below and over on the website event page. Please take a moment to fill that out and help us to make PodTales better in the future. That is all. Have a good night.